Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 17 of Strokecast. This week, I'm going to talk about a few different things. It's going to be a little bit of a different episode. I'm going to talk about a couple of other podcasts that I've recently been on. I've also just read about a couple of interesting studies about some of the different foods we consume, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about my thoughts on my stroke anniversary. That's right, June 3rd was 1 year since my stroke, and so that's made it kind of a little bit of a weird week as I think about everything that's happened. And then we'll get back into our hack of the week as normal. But first, let's talk about a couple of things on other podcasts. The first one I want to mention is, well, actually, it's an episode of my other podcast, 2 Minute Talk Tips. I mentioned last week about the Ability Summit that I had seen a demonstration of Presentation Translator from Microsoft. It's a tool that will actually go ahead and transcribe what a presenter is saying in real time and display it on top of PowerPoint slides. It's actually pretty cool, and it also supports multiple languages. If you want to dive into that in a lot more detail, go ahead and head on over to 2minutetalktips.com/translator, where I take a much deeper look at it. As a result of what I've encountered with using this tool, I'm also going to be able to post a transcript of this episode generated by Microsoft's cloud technology. The advantage for doing it this way is that, well, it's free, and that makes it something that I can actually provide relatively easily. So the transcription may not be 100% perfect, but it will be something that can potentially help if you wanted to go back and read the information in this podcast. I've also appeared on a couple of other podcasts this week that I would encourage you to check out. One is the Inside Knowledge podcast by Lynn Henderson. Her podcast is a series that focuses entirely on resilience, and she has different guests on each week to talk about resilience and the tools they use to help them overcome different challenges and obstacles in their life. And some of those are tools they applied years ago to deal with major trauma, and some of them are tools they still deal with today. A lot of it is about mindset and what it takes to really excel and live the kind of life that you want to live. And I was thrilled to be able to share my story and talk more about stroke awareness on Lynn's show and to share some of that information with our audience. So I would encourage you to check out the Inside Knowledge podcast, available in most of your favorite podcast apps. You can also head on over to strokecast.com/1 year, and you'll find a link to Lynn's podcast. You'll actually find a whole bunch of links that I talk about today over at strokecast.com/1 year. But regardless, Lynn, based in New Zealand, is a fantastic interviewer, and it was a show that was a lot of fun to be a part of. The other podcast I wanted to mention is a podcast called Hand in Hand from the Strokefocus network. You may have encountered this podcast in the past if you've been looking for other stroke podcasts. Basically, each week they talk with a different survivor or professional or someone else related to the stroke industry. Sounds similar to any other shows we know. But it's a great show that is actually part of the broader Strokefocus community, which has a nice web presence and offers plenty of opportunities for stroke survivors to tell their story either in audio or in writing, with some forums, with support for blogs for stroke survivors. So definitely go ahead and check out the Hand in Hand show hosted by Cam. She and I also had a great discussion, and we talked about, again, a lot of different things, our various stroke stories, the importance of actually recognizing when a stroke is happening, some of the challenges around things like neurofatigue, and some of these other things that we work through on a day-to-day basis. And of course, what you have to do to ultimately get better and the work that you have to put into it. Along with, of course, the importance of participating in local support groups if those are available to you. So check out both of those shows, the Hand in Hand show and the Inside Knowledge show. They're both great ones to be a part of. I've also seen some research come out this week, or I've encountered some research that may have come out in the recent past about some of the different snacks we might choose to consume. Medical News Today, for example, reports on a study that was published in the medical journal Heart, which is put out by the British Cardiovascular Society, and apparently has an editor based in the University of Washington, so one of my neighbors up here, about a study conducted in China. So we are really talking about some international stuff here. But the headline of the article is, "1 egg per day may keep stroke at bay." And this is some intriguing stuff because as survivors or as folks who are trying to avoid a stroke in the first place, one of the things we hear a lot about is watch your blood pressure, watch your cholesterol, and there's a lot of public sentiment that eggs are terrible for your cholesterol. And this study is actually reporting that that may not be the case. To quote the article, almost daily egg consumption, or around 5.82 eggs per week, was also linked to a 12% lower risk of ischemic heart disease compared with people who never or rarely ate this food, amounting to approximately 2.03 eggs per week. The study finds that there is an association between moderate level egg consumption, up to 1 egg per day, and a lower cardiac event rate, the study authors explain. This is really interesting, and it's actually a pretty big study because it was a study of 461,213 participants over, I believe it was 9 years. So there was certainly a large pool of folks to be a part of this. And if you want to read the actual study and articles, again, head on over to strokecast.com/1 year, and you'll see those links over there. But it's really interesting how this sort of turns some of our assumptions on their head, since we've been told for decades that eggs are bad for us. I think one of the things that's an interesting takeaway from this is what we're learning about a lot of the different foods that are out there, and that ultimately moderation is the key. I mean, this study showing that lower risk is great, but I don't think they're indicating I should go out to Beth's Cafe here in Seattle and start chowing down on those 12 egg omelets each day. That seems like a terrible idea for many reasons. But perhaps there's not as much reason to be afraid of eggs as we might otherwise. It's interesting, as I've gone through this whole experience, one of the things I have done is, again, try to reduce some of my egg consumption. And I've done that actually by consuming more egg whites, or rather specifically, I went to the grocery store and bought a carton of liquid egg white. What I have found is that whereas I used to make an omelet with 3 or 4 eggs, now I just use 1 regular egg and the rest I make up with liquid egg white. And you know what? There really isn't that much difference in taste. And since there doesn't seem to be any negative to replacing multiple eggs with just liquid egg white, I think that's turned out to be a pretty effective strategy for me, and I kind of like it. But I, for one, am glad that we don't have to run screaming from every collection of eggs. Cardiovascular Business also reported on a study from the Journal of Biological Chemistry with the headline, "Green Tea Component May Prevent Heart Attack and Stroke." To quote the article, "But when EGCG binds to amyloid fibers, it shrinks them and makes them more soluble, and therefore less dangerous." Basically, a chemical in green tea binds itself to the fibers in our arteries that form plaque along the arteries and can cause problems with blood flow and clots and things like that. It makes it easier for the body to go ahead and dissolve them and go ahead and remove them. The article about the study quotes the study and says, "Our results show that this intriguing compound might be effective against the types of plaque which can cause heart attack and strokes." The researchers said a normal amount of green tea is unlikely to have a significant effect on heart health. In other words, this chemical that's in green tea is great, but the amount of green tea a person would have to consume in order for it to have a significant impact on their health is kind of ridiculous. So while some chemicals in green tea may potentially be able to help in a minor way with heart attack and stroke, the main reason to drink green tea remains that it's just pretty darn tasty. And the interesting thing that both of these articles highlight is that it is important to look beyond just the headline on the article about the topic. You actually have to read deeper into it to figure out exactly what the impact means and whether this is actually going to make a difference in your life or not. If we just go by reading headlines about green tea, it seems like this superfood. And you know what? Maybe it is a superfood, but ultimately the important stuff really is in those details. So anytime you see any of these headlines about this new thing is going to be great for heart health and minimize all future risk of stroke and make everything in the world shiny and lovely, read the details, because there's probably a lot more to it than that. Sadly, life and biology ends up being a lot more complicated than we'd like it to be at some times. And speaking of complicated results from biology, this past Sunday, June 3rd, was my stroke anniversary. And I've spent sort of the week thinking about the past year and what I've accomplished, how far I've come, and what I still have to do. So if you'll forgive me, this is going to be perhaps a little bit more self-indulgent than some of my other episodes. But it's interesting as I now enter that phase of Facebook where it starts showing me my memories from a year ago, where I was posting pretty much daily from the hospital and seeing how my situation evolved and how I learned more about what was going on. Overall, a year out from the stroke, I am not satisfied with my progress, but my progress is probably also further along than it ought to be. And that's part of just the way I build myself. I am sort of never satisfied with where I am. I always want to be doing more and pushing further and trying to get more stuff done. Fans of the musical Hamilton will know there's a song in the second part of the show where the refrain is basically, "Why do you write like you're running out of time?" And that sort of sticks with me more now because I am running out of time. And as we go ahead and put out more and more content like this show and partner with more and more organizations, there's so much stuff to do and so much stuff that I want to do. And I figure if all goes well, I've got at most another 150, 200 years or so to get done all of this stuff. And quite frankly, that is not a lot of time. So I've been working hard to do a lot of things and to put out more content, to try new projects and to talk with more folks and to really, sort of try and spread the word, tell more people about things like stroke and the risk factors so that there are fewer folks who have to deal with what I and other survivors have had to deal with, how to recognize the signs so that people can get treatment faster and faster than ever before. And, there's a lot to do. But I've had a lot of help from my team of therapists, from my girlfriend, from family. That's all been there to support my efforts. And even doing things like just starting this podcast back in February has sort of given me an anchor from which I can talk about other things that I am doing, has given me an opportunity to do things like appear on those other podcasts, like the opportunity to work more closely with the hospital's marketing team to help spread their message around stroke, has been given me the opportunity to partner with the American Heart Association on some local media activities and other things like that. I was listening to an episode of Chris Hardwick's Nerdist podcast, now called the ID10T podcast. Yeah, I'm a little behind, so it was one from the end of 2017 where Dana Gould and Janet Varney were the guests on the show. And what Dana Gould said was something so simple. Things lead to things. When you create a thing, when you put a thing out there into the world, that thing will lead to other things. It will lead to other projects and other opportunities and other chances to share your story and to share what it is that you want to share. So what I would like you to take away from that would be, if you have something that you are passionate about, a project that you are interested in, a thing you want to make, go ahead and make it. Go ahead and do it. We are living in a time where digital technology makes these things so much more possible than they were, 5-10 years ago. There are fewer gatekeepers than ever before stopping us from doing the things that we want to do, stopping us from telling the stories that we want to tell. And if that's something you want to do, and if that's something you're passionate about, go ahead and do it. And let me know about your project. Let me know about the things that you want to do, that you are accomplishing, that you are taking those steps to do. Making a thing has a lot in common with the therapy that we do, or that we ought to be doing as part of our stroke recovery. It's learning how to produce something. It's doing the work. It's believing that you can go ahead and make this happen, and taking the steps that you need to take in order to accomplish it. Whether that is going to be producing a podcast, writing your novel, creating a movie, or learning how to walk. All of those things require that idea of dedication, that idea of focusing on that goal, and ultimately of doing the work that it takes to get there. What I see after a year of having to rethink how my brain works, of having to relearn some very basic things, of having to regain my limbs, and we're still not even all the way there yet. What I see in all of that at this point is an opportunity to do something bigger, an opportunity to do something more, an opportunity to do something bigger than myself, and hopefully to help a lot of folks along the way. And yes, that does sound a little arrogant. It does sound a little cocky, but so what? A year ago, my heart and arteries tried to kill my brain and failed. I think that gives me an excuse to be a little bit arrogant about some of this stuff. Again, in the words of the hit show Hamilton, I am young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot. And that brings us to our hack of the week. One of the things I discovered when I was doing my taxes for last year was something I had never really thought about before, and that was the deductibility of medical expenses. And of course, I had a lot more medical expenses last year than in any year prior, and that's probably why for last year was the first time it was relevant. But I discovered that all sorts of things that aren't covered by insurance are tax deductible, at least in the United States. That's going to include things like transportation to and from the medical appointments, parking at the hospital for when I am getting my treatments, payments for services that were not covered by insurance. So what I strongly recommend is that all of those little expenses that you have, whether that's going to be a cane that you have to go out and buy, or a deductible for an appointment, or the Uber over to the doctor's office, keep careful track of all of that. Of course, the big one that I hadn't even thought about was COBRA payments. So if for whatever reason you're paying your own health insurance premiums, that can have a big tax advantage for you. So keep track of all of those expenses throughout the year. All of the mileage, all of the taxi receipts, all of the insurance premiums, all of that. So that when you do your taxes next year, you can go ahead and plug all of that into your spreadsheets or your forms or your TurboTaxes or whatever to make sure you are getting the maximum refund or the lowest tax bill legally available to you. And of course, if you have any questions about this, keep in mind I am not a lawyer and I am not an accountant, so you may want to check with your own tax specialist about it. So that's it for this week. Have you passed your stroke anniversary yet? What were your thoughts like on the experience? Go ahead and let us know in the comments over at strokecast.com/1year. Be sure to check out the Hand in Hand show and the Inside Knowledge show. Links to both will be available over at strokecast.com/1year. And if your doctor's cool with it, be sure to enjoy as much green tea as you like. And consider an egg a day to keep the stroke away. Subscribe to Strokecast in your favorite podcast app, and be sure to share this podcast with a friend, colleague, or random stranger on the street. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.